When grown children lose respect. A guide to rebuilding relationships. There comes a moment in every parent's journey when the dynamic with your children begins to transform. After spending countless years nurturing them, offering guidance and making sacrifices, something subtly shifts. Perhaps they begin dismissing your wisdom, interrupting your stories, speaking condescendingly, or worst of all, treating you as though you've become a burden. This transformation can be deeply painful when the children you raised start showing less respect than you deserve. Feelings of frustration and hurt are natural. You might feel tempted to remind them of all your sacrifices and years of putting their needs first. However, confrontation rarely resolves these situations. It often worsens them. Fortunately, there exists a more effective approach to regaining their respect without arguments, conflict, or harboring resentment. Here are 6 powerful strategies that can transform how your adult children perceive and interact with you. Cease seeking their approval. Many aging parents fall into the trap of trying too hard to please their grown children. You might recognize this pattern in yourself, accommodating their every request, agreeing when you'd rather decline, consistently prioritizing their needs above your own, hoping that your generosity will eventually earn their appreciation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Constantly seeking approval actually diminishes respect. Genuine respect isn't gained through endless sacrifice but through self-respect. When you consistently yield, always accommodate, and perpetually strive to maintain harmony, you subtly communicate that your feelings and needs are secondary. Once this pattern establishes itself, being taken for granted becomes inevitable. Consider Judith's experience. Once a fiercely independent woman as she aged, she gradually surrendered all decision-making to her children. She rearranged her life around their schedules, suppressed her opinions, and overlooked their occasionally patronizing tone. "I'm just trying to preserve family harmony," she would explain. Yet the outcome was precisely the opposite of her intention. Her children no longer valued her input. They viewed her as someone who would always adjust, always agree, always remain silent. If your children's respect has diminished, don't demand it back. Instead, stop acting as though you require it. Establish clear boundaries, decline requests when necessary, and express your authentic thoughts even when they might disagree. The moment you begin respecting yourself, their perception will begin to shift, and eventually that respect will naturally return. Don't argue, set the example. When your grown children dismiss your perspective, talk over you, or demonstrate disrespect, your instinctive reaction might be confrontation, reminding them of everything you've done, insisting they listen. However, here's a revelation that will save you immense frustration. Arguments never succeed in gaining respect. Consider this. When was the last time you won someone's respect through confrontation? Respect isn't achieved through words, but through presence, how you carry yourself and respond when others test your patience. Meeting disrespect with anger only confirms their impression that they hold power over your emotions. Take Thomas's story. A retired professor who had commanded classroom respect throughout his career found his grown children treating his opinions as irrelevant. They ignored his advice, dismissed his concerns, and occasionally even scoffed when he offered guidance. Initially, Thomas responded with arguments, attempting to prove his worth. But the more he fought, the worse the situation became. Then Thomas implemented a crucial change. Instead of arguing, he began truly listening. He stopped pursuing respect verbally, and instead carried himself with the dignity of someone already worthy of respect. He spoke with measured wisdom without needing to prove himself, emanating quiet strength. Gradually, his children began to notice. They observed a man who didn't desperately seek their approval, who didn't need to prove himself, who simply embodied strength and wisdom. If your children show disrespect, don't fight for their regard. Show them what respect looks like through how you treat yourself. Maintain your dignity, speak with confidence, and never descend to reciprocating disrespect. When you stand firm with grace, they will sense it, and eventually, they'll follow your example. Release emotional dependency. 1. Of life's most challenging lessons as we age, is recognizing that we cannot rely on our children for emotional fulfillment. You may love them profoundly and desire their love and respect in return, but the moment they sense you need them for validation, the relationship's power balance shifts dramatically. Here's the reality. People, including your own children, respect those who maintain emotional independence. When you rely on them for validation, affection, or attention, it creates pressure. Rather than feeling grateful, they begin feeling burdened, potentially responding with impatience or irritation. Paradoxically, the more intensely you pursue their affection, the less freely they offer it. Consider Patricia's experience. A devoted mother who had given everything to raise her children, she found herself constantly checking her phone as they grew busy with their own lives, hoping they would call. When they didn't, she called repeatedly, frequently reminding them how much she missed them and how she wished they visited more often. Instead of strengthening their connection, this behavior created distance. Her calls became perceived as obligations rather than welcome interactions. Then Patricia made a significant change. She stopped waiting and calling first. Instead, she focused on herself, developing new interests, socializing with friends, and cultivating her own happiness. Remarkably, her children began calling more frequently. They started respecting her time, seeing her as someone with a fulfilling life of her own. The lesson is clear. The less you depend on your children for emotional validation, the more they will value your presence. When you demonstrate that you stand strong independently, they begin respecting you not from obligation but from genuine admiration for the life you've created. Establish and enforce boundaries. A primary reason children lose respect for their parents is simple. The parents permit disrespect. If you allow your children to speak disrespectfully, dismiss your opinions, or treat your time and feelings as insignificant, this behavior will continue. Not because they're unkind people, but because people, especially family, will consistently treat you according to what you tolerate. Setting boundaries doesn't mean severing relationships with your children or creating conflict. It means calmly yet firmly deciding what behavior you will and won't accept, and crucially, enforcing those boundaries when crossed. Consider William's story. A retired executive who had run a business with discipline and authority struggled when interacting with his adult children. They interrupted him mid-sentence, dismissed his concerns, and even criticized his lifestyle choices. Initially, William tolerated this treatment, believing confrontation wasn't worth the potential discord. However, he eventually realized that each time he remained silent, he tacitly approved their behavior. One day, William changed his approach. When his son interrupted him, he calmly stated, "I'll continue when you're ready to listen." When his daughter dismissed his viewpoint, he simply replied, "You needn't agree, but I expect respect." When they continued pushing boundaries, he made it clear that if they couldn't demonstrate basic respect, he would limit their time together. The result? They began listening. There was initial resistance, but gradually they recognized their father wasn't going to compromise. They saw that he valued himself enough to require respect, which prompted them to offer it. If your children show disrespect, ask yourself, am I allowing this? Without establishing boundaries, they won't create them for you, and if you don't advocate for yourself, nobody else will. Stop giving without appreciation. One of the quickest paths to losing respect is continuing to give to those who don't show appreciation, something parents do more frequently than we realize. We give our time, energy, and support even when it's unacknowledged, taken for granted, or met with entitlement. Here's the truth. When you give to someone who doesn't appreciate it, you don't build love or respect, you build expectation. They stop viewing your kindness as valuable and start seeing it as an entitlement. When you eventually stop, they don't feel grateful for what you've given. They feel inconvenienced by what you've withheld. Consider Edward's experience. A father who had always been generous with his children, he provided financial assistance whenever needed, dropped everything to help them, and rearranged his life to accommodate their needs. Rather than gratitude, he received complaints. They didn't express thanks but expected more. Most painfully, when he finally needed their support, they were unavailable. Then Edward implemented a crucial change. He stopped overextending himself, ceased offering help before being asked, and began declining when necessary. Initially, his children expressed frustration, unable to understand why he wasn't accommodating their every need. However, over time, something shifted. They began valuing his time and appreciating his efforts because they realized his generosity wasn't unlimited, but a gift, not a guarantee. If you feel your children don't respect your time, effort, or kindness, take a step back. Ask yourself, am I giving more than I should? What might happen if I stopped? When you teach people that your generosity depends on respect, they'll begin treating it accordingly. Create a fulfilling, independent life. One of the most powerful ways to regain your children's respect is demonstrating that your happiness doesn't revolve around them. As parents, dedicating ourselves to our children and making them central to our lives comes naturally. However, as we age, this dynamic changes. If you've spent your entire life prioritizing them, they may view you as someone without other interests or purpose. People respect those who have their own purpose, interests, and sources of fulfillment. If your children perceive that you rely on them for entertainment, validation, or meaning, they might feel suffocated or worse, view you as someone without an independent life. Consider Martha's story. A widow in her 70s after her husband's passing, she channeled everything into her children's lives, checking in constantly, offering unsolicited advice, expecting them to fill the void her husband left. Rather than strengthening their connection, this approach created distance. They visited less frequently, their calls shortened, and Martha felt increasingly isolated. Then she made a transformative decision. She joined a literature group, traveled with friends, and volunteered at a community organization. She stopped making her children the center of her universe. The result was remarkable. Her children began reaching out more often, curious about her activities, admiring her independence, and respecting her choices. If your children show disrespect, consider, do they see you as someone with a rich, meaningful life, or as someone merely waiting for their attention? When you demonstrate that you are truly living rather than merely existing, they'll begin seeing you in an entirely new light. Final reflections: respect isn't something you can demand from your children. It's something you inspire through how you carry yourself, establish boundaries, and live your life. If they've begun treating you with less consideration, care, or respect, don't waste energy on anger. Instead, shift your approach. Stop seeking their approval, because the less you need it, the more freely they'll give it. Lead by example, because your dignity speaks louder than words. Withdraw emotional dependency, because the more self-sufficient you appear, the more they'll respect your presence. Set boundaries, because people treat you only as well as you require. Stop giving without appreciation, because when generosity is taken for granted, it loses value. Most importantly, build a life beyond them, because people respect those with their own purpose, joy, and sense of fulfillment. Implement these changes, and something remarkable will happen. Your children will begin seeing you differently, not as someone waiting for their attention, but as someone who naturally commands respect simply by being authentic. Eventually, that respect will return, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it through self-respect and healthy boundaries.